We want to welcome you back to What Are You Thinking podcast. It's a real honor to be with you. I'm Ron Lewis. This is my remarkable wife, Lynette Lewis.
It's great to be with you all today. You know, our podcast is about the power of changing your thoughts in order to change your life. And today we've got one of our very dear friends right here in New York City, Bijou, Abiola. We've been friends with Bijou for the last number of years. We count her really as family with our family. But Bijou has been in New York City for a long time. She's got an incredible career. We're going to get into a lot of that story, how you got to the U.S. in the first place. But I was thinking, Bijou, about a story that would interest our listeners, and that is that there is so much in the world right now, political unrest going on. I mean, we hear about it all over the world. Nation after nation certainly have our own challenges, even here in the United States. But you're not a stranger to political unrest in your very own family. Your uncle, tell us his name.
MKO, Abiola.
Yes.
Very famous story this is. And
From
here you
Nigeria.
are, part of the family. Do you want to go into what happened?
Yeah, tell us
Yeah,
it.
I mean, first of all, I'm so glad to be here. And fun fact, today is my 24-year anniversary of moving to the U.S. So
All right.
24 years ago. I
Hey.
won't say what age I was because then they could do the math. But yes, today, the 5th or the 6th, I think yesterday or today. So it's been 24 years
Happy
since I've lived in New York.
That
Thank
is
you.
awesome.
Yes,
That's
and so what a
incredible.
great place to be spending it with and with you guys. But to your point, Lynette, there's so much going on in the world right now. And even in Nigeria, there are protests going on right now because people are fed up. You know, they're fed up with the government. And like you mentioned, my uncle was actually the country's first democratically elected president back in the 90s. And, you know, the country had military rule up until that point, and he ran on a promise of hope. And he really galvanized the people. And so they voted for him. Unfortunately, the military was not too happy, and he got put in jail. And there was a lot of back and forth to get him released. They had international intervention, even from President Clinton. There were so many people vying for his release. And unfortunately, we lost some family members to that. So his wife, who was vying for his release, got assassinated. And when the man who put him in jail died of suspicious cause, we finally felt like we were going to see him come out and take his rightful place as president. But unfortunately, the day before he was to be released, he died mysteriously as well. And, you know, there's a lot of conversation about how, but we know how he passed away. And so he never got to take his rightful place. And so I'm very excited because not only is this 24 years in the U.S., but it's also going to be my first time being able to vote in a democracy. Regardless of who I vote for, I'm so excited to take part in a democratic process where I know that whoever wins gets to take on their rightful place as president. So
that this will be your first year to vote in a United States election.
In anywhere, because I've been here since I was a minor. So this is my first time voting and being a part of a democratic process. And to know that my uncle lost his life fighting for democracy, it's not something I take lightly at all. So I'm very excited for that. Yeah.
And you were, we won't give your specific age, but you were very young. You were a teenager when you came to the U.S.
Yes.
And in
She was 15 years old, to be specific. Went 15 years old, and you were in a university here in New York City.
Yes.
As a 15-year-old.
I was.
I mean, every 15-year-old needs to jump. Just forget about high school. Go right into college. You did that.
They made me redo my last year, so I ended up going to college at 16, actually.
Okay.
But yeah.
So what was that like, Bijou? You come over here really all by yourself. I mean, you lived with your aunt and uncle, correct?
Yes, I did. Uh-huh.
So you arrive, you're living with family, but you are on your own in a lot of respects, and you're brand new to a new nation.
Yeah.
And it would take you how many years to get your citizenship?
Man, my story is nothing short of a miracle, honestly. And my aunt and uncle are a very big part of that story because, first of all, they brought me to the U.S. to live with them. I had come every summer. So to be honest, we vacationed here in the summer. It didn't feel so new. I knew where the McDonald's was on Flatbush. You know, I knew where everything kind of was. But I did get on the plane as an unaccompanied minor because, to Pastor Ron's point, I was 15, leaving my mom, my brother. But thankfully, my aunt and uncle became home for me. And they had to legally adopt me, actually, because I was a minor. And that process will go on to take years, to the point where actually I've shared this in the book. I think I'll share it again. That
right, the book you're referencing.
Miracles in Manhattan.
Miracles in Manhattan. And
everyone should check it out if they haven't already. But yes, so in the book, I talk about, even going to the point of a deportation notice. Like, I never thought in my life that I would get a deportation notice to leave the country because of inefficiencies on their end. There was nothing on our our end. We had submitted all the paperwork and the back and forth. And thankfully, back in, I think, 2012, when President Obama passed DACA, which is deferred action for people who had come as minors but were illegal in the country, I qualified. So even though I wasn't illegal, because of how contentious my case was, I got to qualify for DACA. And that's how I was able to stay on, was through DACA. I was a dreamer, but I wasn't a dreamer, right? We had filed all the legal paperwork, but needless to say, it was a big fight. And so that's why I became a citizen in 2021. It took literally over 20 years for me to get to this point. Yeah.
Perseverance. When I think of you, Bijou, it's one of your great characteristics is perseverance.
Thank you.
Not even, I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you. Do you believe perseverance is a learned skill, or were you born with it?
Honestly, I think the circumstances of my life have created that. And, I always think of how at every step of the way, God sends help, right? And that for me, I think is what has helped me persevere, is in moments when I wasn't sure if I could keep going, he would send help. He sent you guys at a time when I was in transition, right? And you really revived my faith, so to speak, and joining every nation. So it's at every juncture, he has sent help. So whether it's learned or you're born with it, I don't know, but I know that he has helped me every step of the way.
I know that when we first met you walking down one of the streets over here in Midtown Manhattan, that I was marveling over you as a person and individual, knowing that you have a very rich heritage, a rich story, but also full of problems and hardship.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people might look at someone who's famous or their family is famous, and your family was politically quite well known by everyone. Mm-hmm. And so for these things to have happened, and then here you are in America, and you're a teenager living with relatives, and yet you chose to excel and press into God. That's a big story.
Yeah. And, it's funny you say that. I was telling a friend just this morning about how intentional God is with our lives, right? And how my mom is one of 6 sisters, and I could have gone to live with any of her sisters, but the one that I went to live with was the one that was on fire for the Lord. They all were in their own way, but her husband became a father to me. He's actually, I think I'm closer to him than most people in my life, actually.
Wow.
And so, we won't necessarily get into my family dynamics, but having him as a father figure was also part of God sending help in my life. So to your point, hardship, but feeling very fortunate for all the help that has been sent through all those moments of life.
Can you tell us just a little bit about your background in Nigeria?
Let me see. So I was born in London. First and foremost. But I was raised in Nigeria. My mom raised me, went to boarding school. I started boarding school at the age of 10. As I mentioned, my father's older brother was MK Abiola. So he and I didn't necessarily have the closest relationship, but he was a father figure that I got to spend some time with. And so when he was running for the presidency, I felt very much like my dad's running. Well, he wasn't my dad, but I felt very proud to be a part of my uncle. And then at 15, it was time for college, and I moved here to start university. Obviously too young. I redid the last year and then started school locally. And I was really young, so they wanted to keep me local. I went on to do a BA in economics and then a master's in economics at Colombia. And that's sort of like my quick version of my journey to this point.
You have a master's degree from Columbia University,
yes,
as well as your undergraduate. And
yes.
then you got your master's degree at Harvard Business School?
Yes. So I went on to do an executive MBA. So I'm an alumni of Harvard Business School as well. But I did that much later. I did that actually 5 years ago was when I got my alumni
And you have an
status.
Interesting career. The journey that you have in your career, I think is going to really help a lot of our listeners, because I remember you telling me this story. So you're going to Columbia, you're getting this degree in economics, and you're working at J. Crew.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
On the weekends, to earn money.
Yes.
And you begin to start coming to think differently about your future. You start wondering, and I think this is common with so many of us. We are on a path, either by our own choice or people in our life or our parents or how it's gone. And we begin to wonder, am I really doing what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah.
And you start having those questions. Tell us a little bit about that juncture.
Yeah. I mean, thank God for being young and naive, right? Because I think we take more risks when we're younger. I tend to think than when we get older, because now you're thinking about your family. There's so many things to factor in. But I remember being, I was getting my master's. Again, I was too young to get into the dorms at Columbia for my master's. So you had to be 21 and I was 20. So I got an apartment on the Upper East Side. And so I've always been the youngest. And so in this program, I was about 20, 21. And the average age was, I think, 30 or 35. I had the ambition of going to work for the World Bank, eventually going to get my PhD in behavioral economics. Like I had it all planned out. And so in the summer, we did an internship, and I got an internship with the Nigerian Mission to the United Nations. Again, very grateful for access. And I was working on the economic policy division. And I just remember going into work every day and feeling like it was so simple, Lynette. I didn't want to wear a suit every day. This is what's going through my 21-year-old mind. I'm like, I kind of wish I could dress the way I dressed when I would go to work at J.Crew. And that was right around the financial collapse. And so the plan was I would leave the UN, either go to the World Bank or private sector. And at that moment, I just started researching other careers, specifically in fashion, because I would come alive on the sales floor at the J.Crew right at Columbus Circle. Actually, they had a J.Crew up there. And that's when I came across corporate roles in fashion, and I never looked back. And that was, 16 years ago.
What happened when you start thinking seriously, I could make a switch? What was going through your mind? Because we talk about it starts in our thought life so often. An idea comes, and I think when we're pretty knee deep into an expensive college education and you're in a degree plan and you're obviously having favor in this journey because you've got open doors at the UN, things are going well as that path would be. And what do you do practically to decide to change?
Honestly, so you asked if you're born with resilience or
perseverance.
Resilience, similar.
I do think you're born with grit and sort of like, I love to call it a can't stop, won't stop mentality. So honestly, it was one of those things where I figured there was no harm in trying, right? So I typically don't think about things like, oh, what if this and what if this? I just try. And I always say, God, if this is your will, it's a bit risky. So maybe I won't advocate for that. But again, I was 21. So I didn't really have a lot of language to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking or this is how I'm processing. It was just more, I think I want to go after this. And I saw the job on the internet. And at the time, I always talk about the fact that they used to put their phone numbers and their emails on the job listings back then. And so I called the recruiter and I said, hey, I know my background doesn't match what you're looking for, but trust me, I really want this job. And he's like, I have one more spot in the executive training program at Lord & Taylor, and I got the job. And that was really it. And I had a plan, right? The plan was after about a year or two, I would go back to get my PhD in behavioral economics because I was like, I'll understand how fashion consumers behave, and then I'll go back. And I never went back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did anybody think you were making a bad decision?
Everyone thought I was making a bad decision. Everyone.
What did other people expect of you being from this royal, politically famous background?
Well, I think I'm also Nigerian. Nigerians don't go into fashion. Like this is like now they do, right? I meet a lot of young Nigerian girls who are like, I love fashion, especially now with Instagram. They have, creativity is now a normalized way of earning money. Back then, and I really learned this from my mom. She, had done the same thing. She had an economics degree, master's actually from Columbia as well. And she would go on to start her own fashion line. And so I grew up around the noise of sewing machines. So when I was taking that risk, I felt a little comforted in knowing that my mom had made a living. She raised me as a somewhat single mom off of her income, right? And so to your point, I'm trying to remember what we were saying.
Well, just what were people saying? Did you get resistance?
No, a lot of resistance. My family was not happy. I think I'm relatively bright, and to them, fashion wasn't a job that you do if you're top of your class, if you're, and I'm also the first child, the first grandchild, and there's a lot of sort of everyone's looking at you, right? And I did it promising them that I wasn't going to make a career out of it. It was like, no. I promise I will go back. And it wasn't until I think about 4 or 5 years ago when they started to take me seriously that this was amazing. Actually, again, because thanks to God's favor, I succeeded, right? And it was very clear to them that where passion comes in, success is possible. And so because I was passionate and because God was giving me favor, I succeeded in this sector. And I'm very happy that I made the choice.
I love that.
Great.
I also would be curious how because I've watched you make career decisions since we met.
Yes.
And you've had lots more favor. You've had incredible open doors. your current position as chief of staff at a major luxury retailer here in New York, the way you lead the team, the way you help the president, the chairman of various divisions, the way you creatively introduce ideas into the team. I mean, you've really shown, Bijou, and even in the last several years, you've made some very strategic moves. You were at one company for a long time, and a door opened, you made a change, and then another door opened. I've seen those things happen. How do you explain the process of balancing your own desires and what you believe to be the will of God? I have a thought or two about it, but I really want to hear yours because I've watched you pray through things, wait on God, get counsel, seek wisdom. It's a little bit of everything, but what is really your pattern for decision making at this stage in your life?
I love what you said about seek counsel because actually for me, that's one of my number one ways of making decisions. And, we have an Igbo saying, I won't say it in Igbo, but it essentially says the person that asks questions never gets lost. You're going somewhere, you don't know the way, you ask a question, right? You keep asking until you find your way.
Now, come on. I think that is so, we have to pause on this because this is one of my things that people don't ask enough questions.
Yes, it's true.
It's like, why don't these people around me just ask a few questions and you'll get your answer and you don't have to go through all these experiences that most of them are going to end up in bad situations. So,
and that's really it.
One more time.
It's I won't say it in Igbo, but essentially it translates to the person that asks the questions never gets lost.
Okay, now that's so great that I want you to say it in Igbo for all of our Nigerian listeners right now.
No, I'm going to butcher it because my Igbo is terrible. I can speak Igbo for credibility purposes, but my Igbo is really bad. I think it's like Onya Jujuani Fuduzo or something like
great.
that.
Yeah, sounds just perfect.
I think I said it in the Uguta way and not the Igbo way, but either way.
These African nations are so fascinating, and there's so much that's been going on in Africa. I mean, through our entire lives. And what did you gain? What's the value like that? Even saying that, obviously, there's culture behind that. What were the benefits of you being born and raised in Nigeria or being a Nigerian even in America?
Man, I always thank God every day for making me Nigerian. Nigerians are a special breed. So there's
every Nigerian I've met is special.
Right.
All of them. Even those who, I went to Lagos, I preached there. I have some friends there. And even when you're driving through the difficult, darkest places, they're still smiling.
Yes.
Constantly smiling.
Yeah. And so, what? I think there's a cultural aspect of persistence and resilience built into my personality. Nigerians are very much resilient people. And to answer that, growing up around that meant you pick that up, right? Like no matter how little people had, like we would go to the village at Christmas and go visit family members. And if they didn't have a lot, they still fed you. Like there was never a time I went to someone's home where you weren't offered food. Now, Nigerians always say, don't eat when you go to people's houses.
They do. They say
always think someone's trying to poison you. But that being said, you get the food. And, my point is like hospitality, grit, like no one ever has too little to share and to give. And my grandmother was the same way. She never had too little to give and to share. So, but to your point about navigating, careers, I think prayer, number one. So I start to always say, because I'm kind of in the transition right now, I go by the nudging. There's always that little nudge that starts, right? And for me, unfortunately or fortunately, it almost always starts with just not conflict, but just where there was peace and everything was going great. All of a sudden, there starts to be this like thing
shifting almost.
Right. And and typically when that starts to happen, I start asking God, is my time up here? And that's just a question I ask. And sometimes I want it to be up and it's not up. Like you mentioned, I was at that other company for 11 or 12 years, much longer than I wanted to be there. But I was also in the middle of my immigration debacle. So I couldn't even leave. And what I found is that God will sometimes constrain me. So a lot of times I don't get choice. So I applied to 12 graduate schools. I got into one.
Wow.
I applied to X amount of jobs. I get one. So choice isn't really something I get, I think, because God knows how indecisive I can be. And so prayer, but when I do have choice, and as as my opportunities have come, prayer is the number one. So I typically really believe in fasting because you can hear God's voice more clearly in those seasons, talking to people who have gone before you. So I have been called an over-networker before. I love that title.
Over-networker.
Over-networker. Someone called me into the office and said, you're over-networking. I was like, got it, whatever that means. But meaning, Before I join a company, I reach out to people at that company to have conversations, et cetera. And then most importantly, spiritual counsel. This is where Lynette is a dear friend of mine, but people like Lynette who have gone before me. And I'm like, hey, listen, this is what I'm thinking. What are you hearing? What are you sensing? And ultimately, it comes down to the Holy Spirit making the final decision. But I think counsel is so important when making decisions.
Yeah. And one distinctive I would describe that I see you doing, and it's a value I have as well, is I think one of the reasons people don't ask questions is we are used to asking Google. We're used to asking search engines. We do our own research. You can get armed with information very quickly.
Yeah.
But the power of talking to someone who can nuance their counsel around what they in turn sense God might be speaking to you. Having those people in your life who you trust, their walk with God, their wisdom in God, so that when you're having a conversation, even there have been times you and I've been talking, we start off on one path, and by the end of the discussion,
it's like a whole nother,
we have gone a couple different directions and agree together, this is a revelation from God. This is what he's actually saying.
Yeah.
But it requires relationship to have those discussions.
Yeah.
It can't just be, tell me what I should do next.
Yeah.
It's dialogue. It's doing life together and sticking together.
For sure. Last thing I'm going to say on relationships are so key. I don't know how people navigate life without relationships. And I think because I've had to move around from such a young age, like coming here at 15, my relationships became so pivotal, right? Because my mom wasn't with me. I had to sort of form families along the way. And so I would say relationships are my number one currency when it comes to life in general. And I'm very, very thankful to have really good ones.
So what about mentors?
I'm kind of spoiled. I don't even need them because I'm surrounded by them. I mean, that's the truth. But
that really can work.
Yeah.
I would say,
unless you're with all peers, and can they speak truth to power? Can they
I love that term.
Can they guide you? Can they not just encourage you, but challenge you?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. No,
That's
mentors.
good.
I mean, I have unofficial mentors. Lynette isn't an unofficial mentor. I've never gone to her and said, hey, Lynette, will you mentor me? But looking at her life, looking at her story, watching her as a mother, a wife, of course she's a mentor. But I think people sometimes go looking for mentors without building relationships. And that's what I talk about. Like a lot of times people want to go take money out of something they've never deposited into. It's weird. Relationships are like currency. You invest, you build, and then when you need and you're pulling out, it doesn't feel so transactional. Rarely do I ever go to someone only when I need something. Like I genuinely have an investment in the relationships, whether mentor or peer. And so in moments of need, it just feels very natural. It feels like a conversation. And then I get a lot out of it.
I like that as it relates to the workplace too, because in my own career, I found that what you were just describing to be key. There would be people in the workplace that I didn't need to go and approach them as somewhat of a stranger and say, would you be my mentor? I found the pathway was more like, that's someone I'd like to get to know. Here's what she's in charge of. Here's where she's leading. Here's what she's working on. How can I go and be a part of what she's doing and actually serve her vision? Serve one very powerful woman I worked for at Deloitte here in New York was leading something nationally. She was very influential. My key to relationship with her, she ended up actually endorsing my book, and it was a wonderful relationship over several years. But the start of that relationship was when I was working for her, I was less interested in what she would give to me as a mentor and more interested in aligning with her so that I could help her achieve what she wanted.
I love that.
And that bridge building, I see you do this all the time. It's a way you put currency in that when you want something back. And so often those are the very people in the workplace that will think of us for an opportunity. You've had this so many times, Bijou.
110%, where it's like people wait till things are on the job board. No, you build those relationships so that while they're even thinking of the idea, they already have your name in mind, right? And I love what you said about how were you going to help her achieve her vision? And she definitely picked that up, right? Because when the opportunities came, it's like, Lynette, I'm going to put your name forward. And so workplace, we can talk about that one. That's my passion, is sort of relationships in the workplace and navigating workplace cultures, because it's an entire culture. But it goes back to the person that asks questions never gets lost. Curiosity has gotten me where I am today. So
I love that. I think also, I remember a time I was walking up Broadway with my resignation letter. It was right after Ron and I got married, and I was wondering how I was going to do this new mom thing. I inherited stepkids, and I thought, I can't keep working these rigors of all these hours here in New York. I want to be more mobile with our new life. And I'd talked to my boss. He didn't have an ability to change the job for me. So I had my resignation letter in my briefcase, and I was walking up Broadway. I could take you to the corner. And I was about to make that phone, or I was going to talk to him with my letter in hand. And I made one phone call to another woman that was working with this original woman I mentioned. And she said, give me 24 hours before you submit it. I've got an idea, but I need you to just give me a day. So she went to work on my behalf, and they created a brand new role.
Wow.
They said, we want you to stay. We'll talk to him. We'll figure this out. And it was all from the collateral building days of working. And so often we feel like, goodness, does anyone see? Does anyone really even notice the investments I'm making? And yet later in those key moments, you look back now, I look back at my 40 years of my career and recognize those were the moments where you make that withdrawal, or it comes to you.
It comes to you.
And you don't even know.
Wow. I love that. I love that.
How about your career journey? Very different, but you ask questions though. And you know what? It's one of the things I love about my husband is he asks questions of every single person he meets. And it's always incredible what you find out.
So I think I'm inclined to look up to everyone and know that God put something inside of everyone, and either they're living what's tapped into what God has given them, the talent, the grace, the story. I mean, your story, extraordinary story. And I can easily get enamored with wanting to find out more about you. And
you remember when
are.
we met you? I met you. We met at church, and Pastor Ron was like, "Walk with us." And that's good thing because you just wanted to
come walk with us.
You're like, "Come walk with us," and that's how this relationship began.
And truthfully, that was before we knew anything about your
background.
You knew nothing
about me. You had just met me like 10 minutes prior. Right. You're like, "Walk with us," and Pastor Ron being Pastor Ron.
I think my attitude towards success is to, number one, is to live right with God, to live a holy life. Holy, do a lot of people, maybe they don't know what holy is. It doesn't mean that you have to.
Some people come from maybe a Catholic background where there's a sense of the priest is holy, the leaders are holy. I'll never be holy, but I can do my hard work to be accepted.
So holy just means set apart. Yeah. So that's the first thing. I want to be set apart for God. I want to live. I don't want to foul out by coming home and saying to my wife, "Hey, I've got 3 other wives around the world." I mean, are you kidding me?
Waywardness.
That disqualifies. That hurts people. And so that's number one. But the second thing is to love people. And that right there is, I think, in my life has really helped me. And it sounds like it's really helped you along the way.
And I have to say, that's one of the things that drew me to Every Nation was the love for people, like a genuine love. You know how you go to church and like, oh, we love you with the love of the Lord. No, I saw that here where, it didn't matter the person's status. It didn't matter where they came from. Like there was a genuine love. And one of the pastors that I always think of when I think of a shepherd that loves people is Nathan Lewis. I always look at him and I'm like, he just
we
loves.
know him.
You do? Oh my gosh.
Our oldest son, who's on the leadership team here at our church at Every Nation, New York City. And Nathan is that way.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes.
And that's really great.
You probably wouldn't even know that I think that of him, but every time I think of a pastor that genuinely loves people, I think of Nathan Lewis.
One thing about him is that anytime I call him, his voice sounds happy to hear from me. Yeah. And that's meaningful right there. And actually,
it's true.
I think all my sons are that way too.
I think.
Can I mention the last thing? So this is my success. This is how I view successful people: living holy, loving people, and showing up. And that, I think, is the other thing that we often think that's not taken as for granted anymore.
No, and showing up is a very underrated part of what you've just described.
It's
so
great to hear
many
you say
people
that.
don't show up, and that's the difference between the people that make it and don't, is showing up. Like really, when I say showing up, I mean presence. I mean, going above and beyond, like showing up and really understanding that you bring value. I think so many people don't really recognize what value they bring, whether it's at work, whether it's at church. Like they feel like they need titles. They feel like you don't need anything.
It's true.
To be you.
Thank
right?
you.
Like
and
that's
to make
good.
an investment.
Yeah.
I think that you hit on something here so key, because we all have our own matrix of self-doubt. And so often people will let that hold them back from even being present. When our young daughters are 10 years old and they're still at that age where they go into a classroom, they're going to sit on the front row. They want to be up there. They want to be first. They want to raise their hand. They want to answer all the questions. Then somewhere about middle school, we all think that's not cool anymore. So we sit in the back. But not being proactively present makes us miss out on so many opportunities.
Sure.
So that first day, I want to talk about this for a minute. You had come to our church. You showed up. It was when we were meeting in Times Square a number of years ago, and you're sitting on the third or fourth row. And after the service, you came up to me, correct?
Yeah.
And we started chatting. And do you remember what you said?
Yeah, well, I mean, my love for fashion led me to my career, and then it led me to my new church, because I remember a friend saying to me, so actually a friend had sent me a podcast that you were on earlier that year. And I remember listening to your story, and I was part happy, but part sad. Like it just did something to me, because I'm like, who is this woman and how does she have this fire for God, considering all that she's been through? And I kind of put it away. And I remember it was a Saturday, this friend had come over and she's like, midway through the year, I run into the Every Nation devotional on the Bible app because I really wanted to study faith. And I believe that year's was on faith. This was 2019. And I was saying to her, I'm doing this devotional, and we didn't put two and two together, but she's like, remember that podcast I sent you? Why don't you visit their church tomorrow? And I was like, sure, I'll go. And she says, when you get there, you'll know the wife. She's super fashionista, like you. Those were her exact words. So I get there, and at the end, you guys come up, and I see you at the time, Lynette. And of course, you're Lynette from head to toe. And I was like, that has to be her. That has to be her. So I come up to you, and I'm like, oh, by the way, and I didn't put two and two together that you were the woman from the podcast that I had been sort of inspired by, but also struggling with in terms of how does someone go through so much in life and still hold on to the Lord. And it turns out you knew my godmother, Georgina Hill.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yes.
And you were their pastors in North Carolina. So everything's sort of just like to the point earlier around how does God lead? I find that he sort of aligns it, right? So for about 3 or 4 years, I've been asking God for a new church, but he hadn't opened the door. And then he created an instant bond with you guys that made me feel like it was safe now to sort of move on. Not from a bad blood perspective. I still love my old church, but that now it was time to come into this fold, right? So
that's beautiful.
Wow. And then right after church, we had been chatting. We couldn't quit talking. And Ron came up and I introduced you and he said, come walk with us.
Yeah, come walk with us.
And on that walk is when we discovered that your godparents were on staff with us at our church in North Carolina. You can't make these things up.
No.
But I love the reality that God is into the details. He is into the details. In fact, I'm going to look in the camera right now and talk to whoever's watching or listening to this podcast. I want to assure you that so many of the details in your life that you have felt were random, didn't make sense, don't add up, even some of the disastrous mistakes you've made, the disappointments, the heartbreak, if you will stick with God, he will make something beautiful, like a tapestry, out of your details. And he will amaze you at the redemptive power of his hand in and on your life as his child. If you will give him a chance, God will make sense out of the mysteries that have not made sense before. Sometimes we have to wait for him. I have been through a lot in my life, and I've waited for many years to get the sense I was looking for. And sometimes we live in the tension of mystery for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But God will never fail us.
Yeah.
And he doesn't miss a detail.
No.
He puts it all together.
No, I love what you said, but my life is a story of details. And every time he shows up, it's literally right at the nick of time. And it's not like he's trying to like stress me out up until the moment, but truly it all makes sense. Like even sitting here talking to you guys now, I'm like, wow, like it makes sense, right? To some extent, but in the moment, it never does, or it never feels like it does. But he hasn't brought us this far to leave us. And it sounds cliche, but truly, that's the story of my
There
life.
is no doubt that God leads all of us down his chosen path. The steps of the righteous are led by the Lord, and the Lord is leading your life. The Lord is directing your life. The Lord is, it's pretty much an everyday thing. It's an everyday thing. But I think the difference between some people is some people really just want to make it about themselves, and others, like, they go attack the world with the love of God. And it could be an Uber driver. It could be the guy down the street who's selling flowers or food or whatever. It could be the person this is New York City. And so there's a lot of rapid action that's constantly going on, and people bumping each other, and they almost just like ready to fight just because some accident like that happens. And there's a lot of intensity, but when you're a man of peace or a woman of peace, like you are, Bijou, like my wife is, people of peace, they win in the end. They win. It's like we don't view something small as some real big deal.
Yeah.
And if we could get the perspective of how big is God in your life, he's leading you, he's guiding you, he's providing for you, he's doing things. And for those who feel like, no, I feel like I'm left out, then this is your time to let God into your life, to get to know God, to let God lead your life, to discover your purpose, to live on mission, to watch God do something on your behalf. So many people are just sitting. There's this man at the one of the pools, that it would, whenever the pool water, and this is in the Gospel of John, I believe it's chapter 5. This is just off the hip right here. But the pool had bubbles in it. Every so often it would spring up, and whoever would be able to go into that water would be healed. And I know it's kind of a strange story, but I believe it's authentic. That place is actually there. We can prove the archaeology over this. But in those particular moments, when it would stir up, there was a man who couldn't walk, and he basically gave up hope, and he would not crawl forward into the pit, into the water that would heal him. And so finally, Jesus came into his life, and he said, "What do you need? I want to help you." And a lot of people just want to stiff arm God. I mean, God wants to come and help you and challenge you and change you and do things for you. Well, that man was supernaturally healed. And
Because he said, when Jesus asked him the question, "What do you want me to do for you?" He said, "I don't have anyone to take me
thank you
to
for
the
saying
water."
that. That's good.
Which,
Thank you.
So Jesus became the bridge for him.
Yes.
He said, "You don't need that water. I can do it for you."
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good.
But the
that's
beauty
good.
of you sharing that story is not random, is that it was the pastors that God gave me when he really wanted to start doing some deep healing work in my life.
Well, of course, we didn't know that.
No,
So
and,
here we are.
and I remember being 37, and I got that story as like, now it's time to stop making excuses, right? We can always make excuses, but this, but that, but this. And so at 38 was when he really started, because he had been at the well for 38, or been by the pool for 38 years. And so for me, it was one of those like, how long will you make excuses? In your 38th year, let's get to it. And really, that was when I started to surrender and let God take over in terms of just the healing that I needed in my life. And so it's not random, because
But we should talk about that, because
Well, and I was just thinking, there's something that the two of you have in common that I think will encourage a lot of people who are listening and watching today. And that is that you both had years without a father. Bijou, if you would share a bit about your journey, because I've admired and watched you navigate the understanding of that particular part of your background, that particular part of your life. And when you pressed in for that deeper healing, it's complicated to go there, because we know it's like getting ready for surgery. And I've had several surgeries in my life. You dread it because it's going to cost you something. It's going to be messy. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be pain. But on the other side is healing. And that's been your journey. So you go through this family pain, both of you. You've got this area of mystery in your own background. I have my own share of those kind of stories, different circumstances. I think everybody listening and watching feels that in some area of their life.
Oh, absolutely.
And what I like what you just said a minute ago was that at 38 you started being ready to go deeper, and that isn't something that I think comes naturally. It's decision making. And I watched you. You were like, God, hold nothing back here. I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we're ready for it every minute of our life. You had to get ready for it.
Yeah. And there's no telling what you're going to find when you get there, right? Because you might think you're ready, but when you start asking the Lord to show you things and to really show those places, because everyone's fine, especially in New York. You were talking about the bustle of New York earlier. Everyone's fine. Everyone's got it together. It's very easy to hide behind my profession or whatever it is that makes me shiny or glossy. But I get to sit with myself every day, and I knew the areas that I really needed the Lord to heal, not just so I can move on to the other areas of my life, but just so I could be the person that He had created me to be. And you were referring earlier to living holy. I think also like a clean heart. And part of that clean heart is being able to receive fully from God. And I was finding that I was having a hard time receiving fully from Him. And I knew that Him healing certain aspects of my heart were going to be a big part of being able to receive. So, yeah.
I remember you saying something consistently during that healing season where you said, I feel so free. Yes. I feel so free. And on the other side, it touches me because I know many people listening and watching are feeling in bondage, feeling trapped, broken. A lot of times the most glossy individuals deal with deep pain. And it's hard to fess up. It's hard to go there. But on the other side is freedom. And freedom is costly, but when you get free, you can learn how to stay free. And you are a shining light of freedom, Bijou, at so many levels, far beyond what your resume would say or your beauty. People would look at you and think, how could this woman have ever suffered with this great job and this great career, this great path, great education? Yet you have journeyed through lonely valleys and you've made great choices and you live free. Incremental freedom.
Incremental. I love that. Incremental freedom, because it doesn't all happen all at once, right? But truly in that moment where it's like chipping away little by little by little. And then all of a sudden you feel it. I do feel free, and it comes with joy too. That freedom comes with joy in knowing that it had nothing to do with me, that freedom had a lot to do with surrendering to God and really being open to His healing process. And there was something we were talking about earlier around when you sometimes want to, when you live a good life, like God, not live a good life, but when you are surrendered to God, He fights for you. And it's so frustrating because so many times we want to fight for ourselves. We know the way to hit Him where it hurts or to do certain things. And what I found in my life is every time someone has come up against me and I've left it to God, He has done way more than I can imagine in vindicating or in solving those issues for me. So in moments of transition, it's very tempting to want to take things into your own hands. I've been through many a transitions and many a valleys. But boy, He's written a much better story for me than I could have ever written for myself. So, yeah.
The reality is that all of us have pain. I mean, let's just get real here. I mean, who in the world can honestly say that they don't have emotional or mental or physical issues? And the thing about emotional wellness or mental wellness, we could call it, is that it's hidden.
Yeah.
If I came in with my eye blown off or whatever, everybody would say, what happened to your eye?
Yeah.
But sometimes we just can't see what's going on in people's life because they're so covered. They cover it with beauty salons, hair. They cover it with the people they're with. They cover it with alcohol. They cover it with drugs. They constantly are covering. And this goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where after Adam and Eve sinned against God, I mean, can you imagine they had that whole that universe of Eden where God says, eat anything you want except that one tree. And they both ate the forbidden fruit, and that was the beginning of the fall of mankind. And what did they do? They blamed each other, number one. They went into the blame game where Adam had said it was her, and she said, it's the snake, and they're blaming someone. And then to hide and cover it up, they put on a fig leaf. And God had to step in the garden and say to them, look, here are the consequences of what you did, but we're going to have to get as a fashion person, that fig leaf's got to go. And they had to put on leather. They had to put on a skin, an animal's skin on that. And you think about all the cheap ways that we try to make sure that we look and appeal right to everybody else, including God. And the reality is God sees everything in our lives. There's nothing that he doesn't know about us. And somehow, some way, he still pursues us. He still loves us. 400 years were the Israelites in the desert. 400 years. They kept doing the same thing that their parents
40
did.
years in the desert, but 400 years without.
40 years in the desert, you're right. And then 400 years of this gap of the Israelites being stuck in the land of Egypt under slavery. And if there's one thing that we see in the Gospels is that Jesus came in his first sermon and he said, I've come to set the captives free. Now, we're not talking about captives bonded together in their arms, their legs, whatever. We are talking about the captivity of being a slave to our sins, slaves to our habits, these things that are not good. And that is causing pain, whether we realize it or not. We just did a message yesterday here on orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathos, and how God sees us as needing to know him, because ortho means straight. You go to an orthopedic, you get a new bone, a straight bone. You go to the orthodontist, you get straight teeth. And the same way, to get to know God, we need to know the true and straight up God, who he really is, not the God that we want to create on our own. We want the real God. And that's the only way that once you know the real God, then you can do the real things that he wants you to do, which is practice, the orthopraxis, the practice of doing the right things, and then living in pathos, which is a new way of understanding that God really does care about your emotional and your feelings and all those things. I mean, when my little girls come up to me on a regular basis, their feelings get hurt, I don't say, look, I've heard this before, just go watch some TV. I have to take care of them then. I have to look at them, I have to hug them, tell them it's going to be okay. And I've done that so many times that I really can truly get exhausted over the same issues. But God is not like that.
Right.
God is always there, always caring, always delivering us from darkness, always leading us in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. And I think now might be a great time to say to you that whatever it is that you're dealing with, there is a God who's not only in heaven, but there's a God who's in your life right now, in your home, in your apartment, in your complex, in your workplace, wherever you are, God is there. I met God when I was 18 years of age in a dorm room where dorm rooms are not known in secular university colleges. They're not known for being the kind of place where everyone is clean and everyone is good. It is bad. It is parties, it's kegs of beer, it's alcohol, it's weed smoking, it's all this stuff going on. And how does God do it? It's because love breaks the barriers and walks right through the sin to bring a new life into all of our hearts and into all of our lives. So the pain that you're going through, the bondage you're in, it can all be broken, delivered, and there is a redemption that's coming into your life because of Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross, that he took our pain, he took it into his body, into his life on the cross. And when we look at that man hung on that tree of the cross, hung on that with all the blood and everything coming out of him unto the point of his dying. When you look at him, you think, oh, what a wasted life. He didn't have to have that. But because he was the Son of God who was sent on the mission to take our place, he lived that beautiful life that we could never live. And he died that death in our place so that we don't have to die like that. But we can have a new life. And through Jesus' resurrection, with 500 eyewitnesses, with many people who wrote down exactly what happened on that beautiful Easter morning where Jesus rose from the dead. And we can look and know that he can take care of the pain in your life. And sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it's just steady, and other times it's a dramatic moment where my father, who disappeared for 10 years, if that was my background, he disappeared for 10 years, and then he came back to me, and about a year or two later, he had an experience with God where he was born again. And Jesus said to the rabbi, to a Jewish rabbi, he said, Nicodemus, you need to be born again by the Spirit of God wants to come into you and give you a new you and a new life. And that's what he's doing for some of you right now.
I even think about that story in the Garden of Eden where they knew they sinned. They knew they did the exact thing that God asked them not to do. And we all want to hide from the punishment we know we deserve. But when God began to walk in that garden in the cool of the day, he didn't say, come out wherever you are. You know you're in trouble. Come talk to me. Tell me what you did. I know what you did. He simply walked in and said, Adam, Eve, where are you? He came looking for them, pursuing them, because he didn't want the separation that their sin had caused. He came to pursue them. Yes, there were consequences of their sin and of their bad choices. And we have to live oftentimes in the consequences until those things take time to make right. But the initial move of God is always to pursue you. And I'd like to pray, just as we're getting close to the end, is just pray for those of you who right now may be feeling a pull to make a move back to God, to come back from your hiding, to come back from your shame, from your sense of failure, from your trauma that comes to you sometimes at night where you can't sleep because you feel like you've messed up so badly, yet no one may even know the pain you're dealing with. I want to pray for you right now because God himself is pursuing you, and your Father who created you, masterfully designed you, wants you to come back. Father, we pray right now for those who are listening. Maybe it seems by accident, but you brought them to this program, this story. They've been listening to us, to Bijou. They know that they need to be back in fellowship, or maybe for the first time, get to know who you are. And I pray right now, if that's you, that God will meet with you. You simply just say, Jesus, I accept you. I want to know you more. God, forgive me of my sins. Let them go, and he will wash you, as the song says, white as snow. This is your day to begin that new journey. Father, I pray that you would meet whoever's praying this prayer, whoever's feeling this yearning, where they are. Like we said, you're in the details, and that you will come and you will make a difference. And now we accept your price you paid on that cross, and we simply decide to follow Jesus, to get to know the creator of the universe, Father God, and his beloved Son, Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit will help you. He will walk with you, as Bijou has described this whole program, being close in step with God, with the Holy Spirit, and he will do the same for you. Amen.
Yes, right here on the screen. For those of you who are watching by video, then please reach out to us and shoot us an email, reach out to us, and we'd love to find out more about you and how we can help you and serve you wherever you are. It's a vast network here on the Al Karma TV in particular, and we may not be able to see you, but we know you're there, and we know that you're reaching out right now, and God is knocking on the door of your heart.
That was great. That was very powerful and very encouraging. I know a lot of people got a lot of help from that. Bijou, back to you as we're getting ready to kind of start winding up our conversation. Why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, just look at our audience. For those of you that are listening, of course, we're talking to you personally right now from Bijou, and explain your deepest encouragement to the person who's listening and who's heard what we've shared today so far.
Oh man, it's always easy to listen to podcasts like this and go, wow, what a story. Or it feels like it happened all so quickly. But my story has taken years and years, and it's still in the making. There's still many things that I'm believing God for that I have no idea when He's going to answer. But one thing I've really come to find is that in the time that it takes between when you desire and when He answers, He's really doing a work. It might not seem like it, but I can't believe I'm saying this, that if I could go back and do it all over again, I would ask Him to do it the exact same way, because I have grown tremendously. I'm getting emotional because the woman I am today is because of the pain that I've been through in life. So I'm very grateful. Yeah.
It chokes me up as well because pain is not wasted.
Never, ever.
And we learn, I think, the deepest lasting lessons, even about the goodness of God, in the hours of desperation.
Yeah. And that's where we learn it. And there's not a single person in the Bible that didn't have to wait for something, right? And so now when I think of my story, I think about it in the context of the great cloud of witnesses, so to speak, because we read their stories in chapters and in snippets, but they waited. When I think of David, when I think of, mention the person who didn't have to wait. And so for me now in my waiting, I'm encouraged. Yes, they might be thousands of years before, but when I think of you, Lynette, and how you waited to meet Pastor Ron, it encourages me on my single journey, right? You've encouraged me many times through different seasons of my life, but waiting is part of the growing. And so I wouldn't take this literally, God, but I wouldn't have it any other way. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Surprise gifts that you and I love to shop. We've shared many texts of, should I buy this or not? Is it yes, get it, or no, wait.
It's like, I text you when I want to buy it because it's going to be like, yeah,
you
buy
know
that.
I'm going to say,
Yes.
get it anyway. But I think of the surprise gifts that God had in store for me that I would have never chosen, would never have gone shopping for those things, so to speak, but would never trade them, would never give them back. Would never say it was too expensive, but I would have just never bought them for myself. And those came in my years of waiting. So bravo to you. How you waited.
The last thing I was going to say is that, when we use examples like shopping, people might think, well, like there's so many deeper things in life. But what I love about God is that He uses the things that matter to us to teach us our lessons, right? So for you and I, or as they say, fashion girlies, He teaches us a lot of lessons.
Absolutely.
These, because that's what speaks to us. He's a God of parables. And so He would talk to different people based on parables that they understood contextually. And so for us, sometimes it's the fashion stuff.
Oh,
anyway.
Definitely. Well, thank you again for being with us. You've been a gift to have.
Thank you.
Oh, this has just been a great time with you, Bijou. Thank you so much for coming. And all of you who are listening or watching, thank you so much for being a part of What Are You Thinking podcast.
We'll see you next time.